Sarah Miller trudged through the deep snow, each step sinking into the icy crust that crackled and groaned under her boots. The wind howled across the valley, whipping through the bare pines and carrying with it the bitter scent of frost and pine needles. Her hair plastered to her cheeks, eyelashes rimmed with frost, she pressed forward, feeling the cold gnawing at every exposed inch of skin. Her eyes scanned the endless hills, a landscape that seemed untouched by human life, a place where time itself had paused under the weight of snow. The valley stretched endlessly, white and unbroken, the horizon blurred by swirling flurries that made it impossible to distinguish sky from land. Every so often she stumbled over hidden rocks or frozen roots, the uneven terrain threatening to topple her onto the frozen ground. Her hands, stuffed deep in the pockets of her wool coat, ached from the effort of gripping the reins of her small, weary horse. The animal's breath came in white puffs, misting in the frigid air, and its flanks trembled under the strain of pulling her and her scant supplies through the drifts. Sarah pressed a gloved hand against the horse's neck, whispering encouragement without words, knowing the creature relied on her as much as she relied on it. The rhythmic scrape of hooves against the snow became the only sound apart from the relentless wind. Her mind wandered to the empty rooms of the cabin she had left behind, the echoes of laughter that would never return. Memories of her husband's strong hands, the soft curve of her infant son in the night, flickered and disappeared like shadows under the flickering candlelight. The grief pressed against her chest, a cold weight that matched the frozen landscape around her. She had left everything familiar, stepping into a wilderness that offered no comfort, only the raw, relentless honesty of nature. The loneliness felt like a physical companion, walking beside her, breathing icy air into her lungs. The snow shifted and swirled in gusts, forming miniature drifts that caught against the hems of her coat and clung to her boots. Each gust carried the sharp tang of ice and pine, stinging her exposed skin, making her eyes water. She adjusted her scarf over her mouth and nose, trying to shield herself from the wind that seemed determined to push her back, to make her turn around and give up. But she could not. Something drove her forward, a quiet insistence that pulled her through the white wilderness despite exhaustion and cold. Ahead, the outline of the distant ridgeline appeared briefly through the snow, a dark slash against the whiteness. Sarah's heart tightened at the sight. She knew the terrain well enough to understand that the ridges hid deep gullies and hidden streams frozen over, treacherous underfoot. Her steps became more cautious, measuring each placement of her boots, each inch the horse advanced, listening to the crunch of snow and ice for signs of weakness beneath. The valley seemed alive with subtle shifts, the wind carrying sounds of distant ice breaking, the snap of a branch under a hidden weight, the whisper of snow sliding off a pine limb. Every sound reminded her of her vulnerability, of how alone she was in the expanse of wilderness. The horse shivered beneath her, as if sensing her tension, and she pressed closer, drawing it into a rhythm of survival. She kept moving, forcing her tired limbs forward through sheer will, muscles aching from constant strain. Her lungs burned with each breath, the cold air raw and sharp, and her chest heaved against the layers of wool that offered only partial protection. Yet the movement, slow and deliberate, kept panic at bay, anchored her in the immediate task rather than the gnawing ache of loss that threatened to consume her. Hours passed without reprieve. The sun, low in the sky and hidden behind thick clouds, offered no warmth, only a pale, diffuse light that flattened the landscape and made distance impossible to judge. Shadows of trees stretched long and thin, distorted by the wind and snow, creating illusions of figures moving in the white. Sarah's mind played tricks on her, filling the stillness with imagined voices, laughter of the child she had lost, echoes of doors closing long ago. Each false sound sent a shiver through her, both from cold and the lingering presence of grief that never let her rest. At one point, the horse stumbled, slipping on hidden ice, and Sarah's hands shot out instinctively to steady it. The reins were taut, and for a heart-stopping moment, she feared a fall that could end everything. The animal regained its footing, trembling, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The incident left her shaken, aware that the line between survival and disaster was a razor thin in this frozen valley. Each step forward became a negotiation with the landscape, a careful dance between willpower, skill, and endurance. The wind rose again, heavier, cutting through scarves and collars, whipping against her back, and raising drifts around the horse's legs. Snow clung to eyelashes and hair, masking her vision in fleeting white flashes. She blinked against it, forcing herself to focus on the path ahead, to place one foot, then the other, steadying herself with the horse's rhythm. The valley seemed endless, the cold implacable, yet there was a strange clarity in the struggle, a vividness that brought her sharply into the present moment, a survival instinct honed to every nerve. By late afternoon, the shapes of distant trees began to gain definition, dark smudges against the monotone white of snow and sky. Her shoulders ached, feet and hands numb, but a small surge of hope drove her forward. She recognized the outline of the cabin in the far distance, half hidden among pines, smoke curling faintly from the chimney in a fragile ribbon. The sight of human habitation, a promise of warmth and fire and a place to rest, tightened her chest with a mixture of relief and anticipation. Each step became heavier, yet she pressed on, the horse picking its way with careful deliberation, muscles tense, legs trembling under the burden of snow. The cold had numbed her extremities, but the vision of the cabin ahead was enough to push her past pain. She could almost feel the heat of the hearth, the faint smell of burning wood, the soft, fragile hope of reaching a space where she might, for the first time in months, feel some semblance of life again. The valley narrowed as she approached the ridgeline, snowdrifts giving way to patches of ice and exposed roots. Every movement demanded attention, every misstep a threat. Yet the cold, the wind, and the silence seemed to conspire to sharpen her senses, making her aware of each breath, each pulse, each moment of her own survival. The emptiness of the valley pressed in from all sides, but it also focused her, a stark reminder of what she had lost and why she had to continue. At last, the cabin appeared clearly through the swirling flurries, a dark, solid presence in the whiteness, smoke rising steadily from the chimney. Her heart surged with cautious relief. The horse snorted, its own muscles trembling from exertion, and Sarah patted its neck, grateful for its endurance. The wind continued to howl, the snow still fell, but she had reached a point of temporary safety, a threshold between the merciless valley and the fragile warmth of human life inside. She guided the horse down the gentle slope toward the cabin, aware that every step had been a test, every mile a confrontation with both nature and the ache in her own chest. She slowed as she neared the door, boots crunching in the deep snow, fingers numb and stiff as she reached for the latch. A faint light from the window cut through the storm, casting a narrow glow onto the white landscape. She could smell the faint tang of smoke and wood, feel the heat seeping faintly through the cold air. Relief mingled with fatigue, sorrow, and apprehension as she pushed the door open, stepping into the small, dimly lit interior, leaving the frozen expanse behind, if only for a moment. Sarah's boots sank into the thick snow as she approached the Harper Ranch, each step slow and deliberate, her body trembling from the cold that gnawed through her wet wool coat. Her hair clung to her face, plastered by wind and ice, strands frozen and stiff, framing eyes that carried the weight of months of grief. Every movement felt heavy, her arms burdened not only by the strap of her satchel, but by memories she could not shake, the aching loss of her son still pressing against her chest. The valley stretched empty around her, a vast expanse of white, interrupted only by the dark lines of pine and the jagged ridge beyond, the world muted by the thick blanket of winter. Her breath rose in quick puffs, visible and ephemeral, mingling with the fine mist of snow blown sideways by the relentless wind. Inside the cabin, the small fire sputtered and flared, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls and worn floorboards. Jacob Harper had not left the rocking chair for hours, cradling the tiny, wailing body of his daughter, her cries raw and insistent, shaking the silence of the room with a demand that neither man nor fire could fully soothe. His shoulders were tense, his back aching from constant bending, hands shaking from exhaustion and cold. The warmth of the hearth barely reached the corners of the room, and yet it was the only anchor against the storm raging outside. He moved with careful, slow gestures, trying to ease the infant, adjusting the blanket, leaning closer to murmur soft nonsense, but her tiny body rejected every attempt at comfort. Months of isolation, months of sleepless nights, had taught him the cruel calculus of survival in this frozen valley. His life had been measured in moments of desperation, and now, holding Grace, he felt the edge of hope fray beneath the weight of helplessness. Sarah reached the threshold, her hand brushing against the frosted wooden latch before she stepped inside, bringing with her the damp, cold scent of snow and pine. The warmth of the fire hit her instantly, a striking contrast to the wind-lashed emptiness outside, and for a moment she paused, feeling the ache of life pressing back against her own frozen grief. Her gaze fell on the small, trembling figure in Jacob's arms, the desperate motions of a man who had become both shield and prisoner of a tiny life that depended entirely upon him. Her own body responded, the memory of motherhood pulsing in quiet rhythms, the instinct to nurture awakening long before words could form. She moved closer, carefully, as though each step might shatter the fragile balance of the moment, and reached out with steady hands, offering the only thing she could give without hesitation. The baby's reaction was immediate and instinctive, a soft whimper turning into deep, urgent suckling as Grace latched onto the unfamiliar yet nourishing presence. The tension that had gripped Jacob's shoulders for months seemed to dissolve in the space of a single heartbeat. His chest loosened, a tremor of relief coursing through his tired frame as he watched the child, so small and vulnerable, finally find peace in the arms of someone who understood what need felt like. Each breath of the infant was mirrored by the quiet exhalation of the woman beside them, the rhythm of their presence syncing naturally, a fragile choreography of survival and trust. The storm outside continued its relentless roar, but within the cabin, the sound was softened, transformed by the weight of warmth, by the quiet recognition of shared purpose. Sarah adjusted her position, cradling Grace carefully, allowing the tiny fists to relax against her chest, her body curling naturally into the comforting shape she offered. Jacob moved slowly, giving space without retreating, feeling the walls of the house expand into something broader, something less suffocating. The firelight played over their features, highlighting lines of grief and fatigue, yet also revealing the subtle glow of hope, of a trust formed silently through action rather than speech. Snow tapped against the windows like delicate fingers, yet the room held a sanctuary of quiet warmth, a space where loss could be soothed by the presence of another who had endured it. Time moved differently in the cabin, measured not by hours or minutes, but by breaths, by the rhythm of the child suckling and the soft, steadying motions of the woman holding her. Jacob's eyes, dry from weeks of sleeplessness, tracked each movement, his mind slowly unclenching from the constant grip of fear and despair. He noticed the way Sarah's hands moved, careful and certain, the gentle tilt of her body to accommodate the small weight in her arms, the softness of her eyes as they remained fixed on Grace. The fire crackled, casting warm shadows that danced across the walls, transforming the room into a haven, a fragile but enduring barrier against the harsh winter that pressed against every crevice of the house. Outside, the wind continued to batter the valley, flattening snowdrifts and bending trees in its relentless fury. But inside, the cabin held an intimate world of quiet action and tender focus. Sarah shifted slightly, humming a low, trembling murmur that seemed to thread itself into the rhythm of the child's breathing. And Jacob felt, for the first time in weeks, the weight of despair lessen. The infant's cries ceased almost entirely, replaced by soft, satisfied sighs, and in that shared silence, the room seemed to hold its breath, allowing a fragile, tentative warmth to settle. The storm raged outside, but within, a small, imperceptible peace had taken root, forged by courage, by grief endured, and by the instinct to care for a life that demanded nothing but the presence of those willing to be there. Hours passed, marked only by the gentle rise and fall of the child in Sarah's arms and the slow exhalations of Jacob's body as he observed her, each small moment stitching the frayed edges of their separate losses into something that perhaps could endure. The harsh winter, the wind, the isolation of the valley, all became secondary to the quiet miracle of nourishment, of trust extended and accepted, of the unspoken bond forming between those who had suffered and survived. The cabin's walls, once mere wood and stone, now felt alive, infused with warmth and the steady pulse of life continuing despite absence and sorrow. The snow fell thicker outside, the valley disappearing under white silence, but inside, for the first time in months, the room held a pulse of hope, fragile and unbroken, as a woman and a man, bound by circumstance and grief, began the slow, careful work of saving not just a child, but themselves as well. Morning light filtered through frost-lined windows, casting a pale golden hue over the cabin. Sarah moved with careful deliberation, her hands warming water over the fire, arranging soft blankets and lifting Lily with gentle precision. Each task was performed with a rhythm born of necessity and grief transformed into purpose. Jacob carried split logs from the barn to the hearth, the scrape of wood against snow echoing in the quiet valley. He repaired window latches, secured the barn doors, and checked on the cattle, the familiar weight of labor grounding him in the certainty of survival. Outside, snow drifted silently, blanketing the landscape in white, muffling the wind's howl and preserving a fragile stillness. Inside, the cabin became a theater of routine, each movement deliberate and sustaining. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of Lily's tiny clothing as she dressed the child, smoothing down wrinkles and tucking her into warmth. The infant responded with small movements and occasional coos, her body relaxing into the comfort of sustained care. Jacob paused at the doorway more than once, observing the soft exchanges, the subtle interplay of gesture and attention, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in his chest as he watched life resume its quiet flow. The walls of the cabin, once mere barriers against the cold, now seemed infused with presence, a living frame around acts of care repeated and refined. Days followed the same cadence, measured in the cycles of feeding, cleaning, and tending the land. Sarah adjusted the routines with gentle observation, discovering the timing of Lily's needs and anticipating the small rhythms that made life smoother. Jacob adapted alongside her, recognizing the patterns and allowing himself the rare luxury of relief as he shared tasks without pride or hesitation. Each chore, mundane or strenuous, became a silent dialogue, a shift of weight, a glance, a placement of hands, all reinforcing trust without words. The snow continued to fall outside, heavy yet patient, as though the world itself acknowledged the quiet transformation taking place within the cabin. At night, the fire's glow spread warmth across the walls, shadows moving in time with the flickering flames. Sarah rocked Lily to sleep, her humming soft, blending with the creak of the rocking chair and the occasional crackle of burning logs. Jacob remained nearby, attending to small repairs or feeding the animals, his movements unhurried, each step reinforcing the safety of the space. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, milk, and damp wool, a mixture that became inseparable from the presence of home and care. The infant's breathing slowed, her eyelids fluttered, and the faint smile curved her lips in sleep, a testament to the sanctuary they were building together. The routines became rituals, silent acts layered with intention. Morning light brought the preparation of breakfast. Midday demanded care for the land and the livestock. Evening required tending the fire and ensuring warmth. Every gesture carried meaning, even when unspoken. Jacob setting a clean blanket at the edge of the cradle. Sarah folding his shirt after chores. Lily reaching instinctively for the arms that had become her security. Trust, once tentative, settled into permanence through repetition, through the gentle insistence of life continuing despite past grief. The valley outside remained cold and relentless, but inside the cabin, presence and attention softened the sharp edges of winter. Even the smallest moments were weighted with significance. Sarah's touch on Lily's cheek, Jacob's careful stacking of logs, the placement of a cup of water beside the fire. All these gestures became part of a quiet lexicon of care. Their connection was measured not in words, but in the accumulation of acts, each reinforcing the invisible threads that tied them together. Snow continued to fall beyond the cabin, silent and persistent, as if the world had paused to respect the sanctity of these new rhythms. In this shared existence, grief and loss coexisted with attention and healing, forming a delicate balance that neither of them could name, but both felt deeply. A steady pulse beneath the hush of winter and the warmth of the firelit room. Sarah moved through the cabin with careful deliberation, her hands lingering over Lily's tiny form, tracing the contours of the child's face and fingers as if mapping a territory, both fragile and precious. Each movement carried a weight she could not name, a mixture of reverence and fear, the memory of her own son pressing against her chest like a cold, unyielding stone. The scent of milk and warm blankets mingled with the lingering smoke from the fire, creating an atmosphere thick with presence, each detail amplifying the ache she carried beneath the surface. She folded the infant's clothing, smoothing wrinkles with trembling fingers, each gesture measured, cautious, as though misstep might shatter the delicate balance she clung to. Jacob watched her from across the room, observing the subtle shifts in her posture, the occasional flinch, the way her gaze flickered toward Lily and then away, as if measuring the distance between desire and fear. He had learned to read the silences that passed between them, each pause, each exhale, a wordless confession. The cabin, once stark and empty, had begun to echo with the quiet rhythm of routine and attention. Morning light filtered through frost-laced windows, dusting the wooden floors with a pale gold, catching the drifting motes of snow that clung to the glass. The valley outside remained an endless white, wind whipping against the cabin walls, yet within a fragile warmth persisted. Sarah would sometimes pause in the middle of a task, rocking Lily gently, feeling the baby's small body relax against her chest. Yet her mind would drift, memories rising unbidden. She remembered the sharp winter night when her son had fallen ill, the fever stealing him quietly, leaving a silence that had never truly lifted. The sensation of loss coiled tightly in her stomach, a familiar ache she tried to mask with care for the child before her. Each smile from Lily, each soft coo, brought a simultaneous rush of hope and terror, a reminder of love's capacity to wound as much as it healed. She held the infant close, inhaling the warmth, the scent, allowing herself the brief illusion of holding on to something whole, something alive. Jacob's presence became a tether to the moment, steady and unintrusive, his own grief a quiet shadow behind the rhythm of their shared bays. He moved with purpose, stacking logs, repairing the cabin's frost-bitten doors, yet his eyes returned often to Sarah, noting the small tremors in her hands, the hesitant smiles that surfaced only when Lily's gaze met hers. Their world had contracted into these narrow corridors of firelight and snow, where gestures and silences conveyed more than words could. A brush of a hand against a shoulder, the careful placement of a blanket, a nod acknowledging an effort unspoken. All these acts wove a delicate lattice of trust between them, fragile but persistent. Outside, the blizzard intensified, sculpting the valley into a pristine expanse of white, wind roaring through the pines and across frozen streams. Yet inside, the cabin was alive with movement, ritual, and unspoken understanding. Sarah's attention to the smallest details, warming water for the morning feed, tucking Lily into her cradle, laying out fresh clothes, anchored them to each other and to a sense of continuity in a life otherwise marked by absence. Jacob mirrored her care with equal precision, maintaining the barn, feeding the animals, ensuring the hearth remained alive, a steady pulse against the relentless cold. Each task became a meditation, each action a statement of presence, a refusal to be swept away by the ghosts that lingered in memory. Night fell slowly, the storm outside muting the world in white silence. Sarah held Lily against her chest, rocking in the firelight, eyes tracing the flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Jacob moved quietly behind her, placing wood onto the fire, the subtle crackle and pop punctuating the hush. Memory and grief hovered like fragile specters, yet they no longer dominated the room. The small gestures, the careful adjustment of a blanket, the gentle smoothing of a tiny hand became a language of their own, a shared rhythm that allowed them to navigate the ache of loss while cultivating something new, something quietly resilient. Snow continued to fall, layering the valley in white, but inside, warmth persisted, and with it, a fragile, enduring hope that grief could coexist with the beginnings of trust and the first tender threads of love. The rumors that had drifted like smoke through the small town finally coalesced into action, carrying with them the weight of entitlement and threat. 3 men, tall and solid, mounted horses that trudged through the thick snow, their boots crunching against the frozen earth. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the valley ahead, anticipating an easy claim on the Cole homestead, convinced that the combination of a widower, a child, and a solitary woman could not withstand the assertion of force. The wind whipped around them, tearing at scarves and coats, biting through wool, yet their purpose remained undeterred. Jacob stepped out onto the porch, his posture deliberate, shoulders squared against the cold and the tension that hung in the air like a dense fog. In his hands, the rifle felt heavy and familiar, a natural extension of his own strength and resolve. Each snowflake that landed on the barrel melted instantly, sizzling with the heat of the metal. And he breathed steadily, grounding himself in the rhythm of preparation, in the knowledge that defense was now necessity. He did not hesitate, did not waver. The lines of his jaw were firm, and the clarity in his eyes spoke to a man who had measured loss and emerged with purpose. The first of the intruders halted at the edge of the yard, boots sinking slightly into the soft drifts. He studied the cabin, expecting weakness, a sign of fear, yet found only quiet vigilance. The snow continued to fall around them, muting sounds, creating a distorted, ghostly landscape in which the tension was sharpened by the cold, the isolation, and the palpable stillness.
The second and third men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces as they noticed the subtle details that marked the Cole homestead as defended. Fresh wood stacked by the fire, footprints that indicated constant vigilance, the faint glow from the hearth suggesting life and the awareness inside, all spoke louder than words. Jacob shifted slightly, the rifle steady in his grasp, muscles coiled beneath heavy layers of wool. He did not raise his voice, did not make threats, for the weight of his presence and the certainty in his stance carried authority beyond speech. Each movement was deliberate, a foot placed firmly on the porch, a hand brushing snow from the barrel, a careful survey of the approaching figures. The wind howled, but he remained unmoved, the cold an additional challenge rather than a distraction. The snow underfoot seemed to echo the heartbeat of the standoff, each crunch a declaration of readiness, each puff of vapor a witness to resolute. The men hesitated, uncertainty growing as they assessed the scene. The cabin was not merely a shelter, it was the nucleus of a quiet, persistent strength. In the flickering firelight glimpsed through the windows, the faint shadows of Sarah and Lily suggested presence and vigilance, the silent accompaniment that transformed a lone man into a fortified unit. The intruders recognized instinctively that this was not an easy conquest, that force alone would not unravel what had been built through months of care, endurance, and unspoken understanding. The rhythm of daily life, the small but precise actions that threaded together protection and nurture, now radiated outward as deterrence. The first man took a cautious step forward, but Jacob's steady gaze and the subtle shift in his stance froze him in place. Each breath of wind seemed amplified, the flakes swirling like white ghosts around them, and the men felt the weight of not only the snow, but the unyielding resolve confronting them. The cabin, its hearth, and the figures inside became more than a structure or simple lives. They were a claim staked with sacrifice, a unity forged in grief and care, and the realization that any attempt to disrupt it would be met with unwavering resistance.
Time stretched, measured by the rhythm of snow falling and the silent conversation of posture and glance. The intruders assessed the impossibility of taking by force what had been made inviolable by presence, by shared responsibility, by the quiet but absolute commitment to protect one another. Gradually, the hard lines of confrontation softened, replaced by the recognition of the moral and physical barrier standing before them. The threat had been declared and measured, and in that acknowledgement, the tension began to release, the intruders stepping back, retreating under the unspoken authority of a family whose strength was invisible yet unmistakable. Jacob lowered the rifle slightly, keeping his movements deliberate, allowing the weight of the standoff to settle into memory. Snow continued to fall in thick, blinding sheets, muffling the world beyond the homestead. But within, the cabin remained a bastion of warmth and resilience. Sarah adjusted Lily in her arms, the baby stirring briefly but finding comfort in the security radiating through the room. The threat had passed, yet its echo lingered, imprinting the understanding that protection was not given lightly, that family, chosen, nurtured, and defended, could command respect without a single word spoken. The men mounted their horses, each motion careful, deliberate, as if acknowledging the unspoken lesson of the morning. Their departure left behind a quiet that was more than silence. It was recognition, a measure of the power inherent in unity, vigilance, and the quiet insistence that some things, some people, were not to be trifled with. Jacob watched until they disappeared into the snow, shoulders still squared, heart steady but aware of the fragility that lingered in the world beyond his cabin. Inside, the fire flickered, the warmth settling over Sarah and Lily, over the homestead that had survived both storm and human challenge. In that warmth, a profound understanding rooted itself. They had endured not merely by chance, but by courage, care, and the unspoken promise that no threat could dismantle what had been deliberately, tenderly built. Spring arrived gradually, melting the last stubborn patches of snow that had clung to the valley throughout the harsh winter. The air carried the faint scent of thawing earth and new growth, a delicate promise of life returning to the quiet landscape. Jacob and Sarah moved through their days with a rhythm born of survival and attentiveness, each motion deliberate, each task an unspoken expression of care. The cabin, once merely a shelter against the cold, had transformed into a home, walls infused with warmth from firelight, human presence, and persistent effort. They placed the new cradle in the corner of the room, carefully smoothing blankets and arranging it with quiet reverence. The gesture was more than practical. It was a statement of permanence, a declaration that the child, and by extension the family, would be nurtured and protected. Outside, near the fence line, they planted a small tree, its tender branches reaching toward the sky, a living emblem of resilience, growth, and the passage of time. Each seedling, each sapling, each chore undertaken together became a quiet affirmation of life reclaimed, of hope cultivated through patient labor and mutual reliance. Lily thrived under their attentiveness, her laughter bright against the muted backdrop of the valley. She moved with the confidence and curiosity of a child who felt entirely safe, whose world was bounded by steady hands and warm hearths. Every meal prepared, every log stacked, every floor swept, and every bottle warmed was a gesture that reinforced security and belonging. Jacob and Sarah communicated not with words, but with gestures, glances, and shared responsibilities. Each act, however small, carried the weight of devotion, threading their lives together in ways neither could have articulated, but both deeply understood. The winter storms that had once defined the valley were now memories softened by sunlight and growth. Jacob chopped wood, his movements precise and unhurried, each stroke a meditation on continuity and care. Sarah tended to the household, ensuring that warmth, nourishment, and order prevailed. Their labor was silent but expressive, a dialogue of commitment that transcended speech. Even mundane tasks, fetching water, repairing the fence, sweeping the porch, became rituals of connection, grounding their lives in a shared purpose and an awareness that family was built moment by moment. Outside, the valley itself seemed to awaken with the changing season. Patches of green pushed through the melting snow, birds returned to branches, and the wind carried the soft, refreshing scent of life renewed. In this transformed landscape, their home became an oasis of constancy and care, a place where loss had once shadowed every corner, but now gave way to growth, laughter, and the slow, deliberate cultivation of love. Each morning light fell on the cabin with a quiet reassurance, and each night the family gathered near the hearth, enveloped in the warmth of routine, devotion, and steadfast presence. Jacob and Sarah's bond was subtle, often unnoticed by outsiders, yet profound. Love was measured in actions, the meticulous preparation of meals, the quiet rearrangement of furniture for comfort, the gentle rocking of Lily until she slept. Words were scarce, unnecessary in the presence of shared understanding, of mutual respect, and the deep satisfaction of a family functioning in harmony. Every movement reinforced the unspoken truth that they had chosen each other deliberately, and through that choice, they cultivated a safe, enduring home. Time passed with a gentle cadence, each day layering upon the last, building a tapestry of routine, trust, and unhurried affection. Even challenges, unexpected snowfall, a sick calf, a blocked path through the woods, were met together. Their cooperation and attention to one another turning potential crises into shared triumphs. The valley, once dark and isolated, now bore witness to a quiet miracle, the emergence of a family forged not by circumstance alone, but by persistent care, moral courage, and the conscious decision to remain present for one another. As the sun set, painting the snow-melted slopes in soft golds and pinks, Jacob and Sarah paused in their daily tasks, taking a moment to absorb the serenity around them. Lily's soft breathing in the cradle echoed through the room, a rhythm as steady and reassuring as their own. Outside, the young tree swayed gently in the spring breeze, a living testament to patience, nurturing, and hope. The cabin, the hearth, the valley, and the family within had been transformed, no longer defined by past sorrow, but by deliberate acts of care, devotion, and enduring choice. Their lives continued, anchored in the daily rituals that had become their language of love. Each day reaffirmed the strength of their decision to stay, to care, to protect, and to grow together. Through snow and sunlight, through toil and quiet reflection, Jacob, Sarah, and Lily formed an inseparable bond, a family not merely survived, but deliberately, lovingly constructed. Their home resonated with warmth, the echoes of effort, and the profound satisfaction of hearts choosing each other every day. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that true family is built through care, devotion, and conscious choice rather than blood alone, subscribe to Dust and Devotion Tales to experience new stories of love, resilience, and human loyalty.